The following is an America Matters media production. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of the station or its advertisers, although we think they should. But that's the opinion of America Matters Media.
This is not America. Sha-la-la-la-la. Little piece of you.
Hello, welcome back to Talking Truth to Power. I am your host, Brendan Trainor. My co-host is Leland Faegre. And today we have a special guest with us, the author of Robert Gore, and he wrote a book called Everything I Know About Business, I Learned from the Godfather. And he's a friend of Leland here.
Yep. Robert and I met about 97, I think. Do you recall that, Bob?
It was whenever you joined Crowell Weedon down in Los Angeles.
Late in the last century, and I always had fun tripping into the trading floor and discussing events of the day with my good friend Robert Gore, who now has this extraordinary book available on the market now, and I'd like to introduce you to him now. Meet Robert Gore. How are you, Bob?
I'm fine. And you?
I'm good. So, your application of life skills in the course of the 100, how many pages of the book?
I think it's like 158.
158 pages?
Official count.
And effectively, it's just about life as it applies with a Godfather theme. Would you characterize it that way?
Yeah, I have seen the Godfather movies, both... the ones I write about in the book are Godfather 1 and 2, because I really didn't like Godfather 3, but I thought Godfather 1 and 2 were two of the best movies ever made, and I've seen them both, I don't know, anywhere from 10 to 15 times.
Wow, that's good. Yeah.
Yeah, they're always on, and if you don't watch the whole thing, you always grab the excerpts as you channel surf, yeah.
I have a confession to make. I've never seen either one of them.
Oh, you never have? No.
But I've been by the building, the structure they used in Godfather 2, because it's at Lake Tahoe. It's just south of Tahoe City.
Right.
So I go by there every now and again. Does that count?
Yeah, I'll give you a B+ on that.
Okay. So tell us about the book, Bob. Give us some just a general thesis of where it goes, how it plays out.
Well, the two main characters in The Godfather, played by Mario Puzo,
Al Pacino?
Played Al Pacino, yes,
Yeah.
as the Godfather's son, and then the Godfather himself, played by Marlon Brando, are extraordinarily powerful, and I don't mean just in a sense that they have a lot of power in a political or economic sense, but just in the fact that their personalities were so powerful. It's absolutely compelling. It's what draws people into the theaters and has drawn them and has made The Godfather a classic.
Charismatic figures, would you say?
It's not even that. It's just force of personality, I think, is the right word. These are people who are incredibly self-contained, incredibly what's the best word for it?
Understated?
Very understated. Yeah. And actually that's one of the themes of one of the chapters in the book.
Being underestimated.
The virtue of being underestimated. They have no need to impress you. They have no need to make any kind of, and in our day and age of hype and everything else, it's the complete opposite of, say, a Donald Trump type character. They are not self-promoters. What they're most interested in is respect, and that's the theme of the second and the third chapter in the book. Respect for the people in their organization, respect for the organization, and respect for themselves, and then self-respect, the idea of containing your passions, of containing your emotions, of not showing your emotions, especially in ways that won't serve your strategic interests.
It's a pride, isn't
And
it?
to me, excuse me?
It's a pride, isn't it? I mean, ultimately.
Yeah, it is pride, and it was something that I learned that seemed to have a great deal of applicability to me. As Leland knows, I was a bond trader when we were working together.
You're getting ahead of me, buddy. We're
And-
going to get into that, but go ahead.
And I found it was so important to the hardest thing in trading is not to let your emotions, and particularly your ego, which I deal with in a chapter in itself, take a hold of you when you're trading. You can't get too high when you're making money. You can't get too low when you're not making money. You have to be in control of yourself, and it's the only way. And you have to be able to run contrary to the crowd. You have to be able to say, everybody is doing one thing, I'm going to do the opposite.
Yeah.
And I found that was a lesson that I learned and relearned through my trading career. When I let my ego run ahead of me and whatnot, I got killed.
That contrarian label is kind of overplayed, though, but it's still important. Wouldn't you say it's probably one of the most important characteristics of the trading industry?
I have never seen anyone who was a good trader who was not at heart a contrarian, who just didn't care or cared very little about what everybody else thought, came to their own conclusions, and lived with the consequences. And it's always a probabilistic thing. Everybody calls themselves contrarian, but very few people really have what the Godfather and Son had, strength of character to go their own way.
It's hard to let go of the wave, a good thing, as long as it's there. It's difficult to break away, as they say.
Speaking of breaking away.
Yeah, we're coming up on a commercial break here, but when we come back, I want you to incorporate more of the financial theme, if possible, as it applies to your book, and we'll kick it into high gear at that point.
This is America Matters Media on AM 1180 KCKQ, a Lotus broadcast station. The power of radio since 1967.
Unable to listen to the whole show? A recording of today's program will be available later today. Visit americamatters.us and click on the podcast link. Now, back to the show.
Hello, welcome back to Talking Truth to Power. I am your host, Brendan Trainor, my co-host Leland Faegre, and our special guest today. And what was the name of your book there, Rob?
That would be Everything I Know About Business I Learned from the Godfather.
Which is an hysterical title.
Yes.
It's just brilliant. Absolutely hysterically funny.
It's available on Amazon in both Kindle and paperback, huh? Very good.
That's correct.
Yep.
So
And
it's
if you go to my web.
go ahead.
If you
Go
go
ahead.
to my website, just to provide another way of getting it, if you go to my website, straightlinelogic.com, right there on the home page, there's a graphic of the cover of the book with links to both of the Amazon paperback and to the Kindle ebook.
Great stuff. And so when we met in the 90s, it was quite a different time. How would you look back on that period as it? That was 20 years ago. Believe it or not, it's hard to believe.
I think that the one huge change that I've seen since then is that people back then still primarily believed in a lot of our institutions, especially the government, but corporations the colleges, the foundations, the think tanks and whatnot. It all had a patina, undeserved even at that time, but a patina of legitimacy.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the central themes of my book, Chapter 9, is called Il Capo di Capi, which is Italian for the boss of the bosses.
Mm-hmm.
And the central tenet of that chapter is that the government is the ultimate organized crime family.
Mm-hmm.
That was an idea that wouldn't have flown back in 1997. Now it doesn't even ripple on the pond. People now, there's so much more acceptance, cynical, resigned, whatever you want to call it, that is indeed the truth. And just in the last few weeks, we've seen it play out in all the headlines.
Mm. Yeah.
You've got the FISA scandal. You've got you've got the OPCW scandal. And the thing that was amazing about The Godfather, there's a scene in Godfather 2 where Michael Corleone and the senator from Nevada, Patrick Geary, are sitting in a beautiful room overlooking Lake Tahoe in Michael Corleone's compound. And they're talking about organized crime and about the government.
That they didn't like competition? Was that the... Is that where it was?
Well, they basically, and Michael says to the senator, we're both part of the same hypocrisy. That was a radical thought back in, I think it was 74 when that movie came out, that organized crime and the government, as represented by Geary, were the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's the corruption of late-stage empire, that's for sure. I think there are a couple of governments that maybe don't fit into that distinction, but gee whiz, everything in the West does. I mean, it's all corruption and lies. Look at all the Afghan war has been proven to be a big lie, and the FISA Accord is now a big lie. The FBI, well, we knew all these things 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and the mainstream media, or some of them, not the mainstream media, but at least one or two outlets and the alternative media are proven right again and again.
Yeah, and it took Trump to expose it.
Yes, Trump is like Toto in The Wizard of Oz. He's pulling back the curtain on the wizard.
And there he is.
Yes, and there he is.
For everybody to see.
Yes, exactly.
And that really is what the impeachment imbroglio is now.
Right.
It's just a way to cover up their own tracks from their own complicity to corruption. So as it applies... Go ahead.
I was just going to say, yeah, when you get attacked, try to turn the attack around, and you're right, exactly what the impeachment thing is. Mm-hmm. And I've written about that on Straight Line Logic as well.
Mm-hmm. You've had quite a bit of exposure, your work on other platforms, haven't you, Bob?
Yeah, Straight Line Logic gets picked up. I don't know how many internet alternative media partisans there are out there, but yeah, I get picked up on Zero Hedge, Lou Rockwell, David Stockman, Western Rifle Shooters Association, Burning Platform. Yeah, it's been gratifying. My own site gets a certain number of viewers, but it magnifies what I have to say, and the book is certainly helping as well. It's getting picked up pretty well.
And this is your fourth book now, isn't it? Or is it
fifth? Yeah, it's my fourth book. I have 3 novels. Mm-hmm. This is the first nonfiction, business, politics, personal story type book, memoir, to the extent I'm ever going to write a memoir.
Well, you could do worse. The information yesterday about the FISA court being exposed, I thought was particularly duplicitous because Nunez had sent documentation over to FISA a couple of years ago, and now they've thrown up their hands as if to say they didn't know any of this was going on, that they weren't being set up by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. What do you think? What do you make of that?
It's just disingenuous. I mean, these people are experts at this. It's like the Washington Post printing these Afghanistan papers, exposing the lies that the Washington Post promoted for years and years and years. The degree of contempt, and I said this in my book. I said Donald Trump's running mate in 2016 was contempt. The contempt and complete lack of respect that has developed for our major institution. But the contempt that the powers that be, the deep state, whatever you want to call these people, the rulers, whatever, that they have for the intelligence of the rest of us, and never fails to amaze me. It's like they think that we don't remember anything, that we can't grasp what's readily obvious. When the IG Horowitz's report was released, the mainstream media took the one headline thing. Oh, okay, the FBI didn't have bias when they initiated the investigation. And then the alternative media immediately gets to work, and we start digging out all of the things that implicate the FBI and essentially setting up an effort to depose Trump through the FISA court. And it's like, do these people not understand that, that it's going to take a few days to digest a 400-plus page report? But we're going to get the joke. Hey, the FBI was doing a lot of things. There's 17 points where the FBI was cited for irregularities, lies, not amending subsequent FISA applications and whatnot.
But given their predicament, I mean, they really don't have an alternative. This is how desperate animals defend themselves.
Yeah, when they're cornered, that's the most dangerous animal.
Yeah, and they are cornered now.
Yes.
They are cornered, and we're coming, and again, I talk about this in the book, too. I have a chapter, and I believe it's chapter 10, on Sicily, and how the alliance between the Sicilian government and the mafia destroyed the country. Well, we're walking down the same path. And The Godfather, I think, was way ahead of its time in pointing out the alliance between organized crime and The Godfather. Now we have a lot of organized crime families, between organized crime and the government, Now we have an alliance between a lot of organized crime and the government, the military-industrial complex, the Federal Reserve banking cartel, the FDA pharmaceutical cartel, the SEC securities industry cartel. These are all basically rackets.
Yeah, the planet's crawling with them.
Hey, don't forget the Zionist cartel, man. We're one of the few shows that'll even talk about it here and Talking Truth to Power. But that is another major crime organization right there.
Bringing Epstein into the conversation, but we have less than a minute, so be careful where you go.
Well, yeah, but I mean, we all know Epstein didn't kill himself. But
oh, yeah, okay, I see where you're going there.
No, but
the best set articles I found about the Epstein was the series of 4 articles Whitney Webb did for Mint Press News.
Yes.
That was fabulous.
Yes, I agree. She really laid it down there, and she went all the way back to the 50s, and it was that was organized crime. The Dulles brothers, for example, during the Eisenhower years. That, the whole establishment of the military-industrial complex, which nobody wants to talk about. They just passed a major defense bill. Rand Paul voted against it.
Yeah. And there's never any reference to the Council on Foreign Relations.
No.
The most prestigious group that played its hand in the last century.
Right.
Talking to Victor from Precision Diamonds. Victor, I remember you in the old days, Park Lane Mall, a kiosk.
This is America Matters Media on AM 1180 KCKQ, a Lotus broadcast station. The power of radio since 1967.
To join the conversation, call 844-790-TALK. That's 844-790-8255. Now back to the show.
Hi, welcome back to Talking Truth to Power. This is your host, Brendan Trainor, our co-host, Leland Faegre, and our special guest, Bob
Gore.
Bob Gore. I was going to say Poole for some reason. I'm sorry, but Bob Gore, author of the fabulous book that we've been talking about. What's the name of your book that's available on Amazon, Bob?
That would be Everything I Know About Business I Learned from The Godfather.
Makes a great stocking stuffer.
Yes.
It does.
Yeah.
And if you order today, you can get it before Christmas, I think.
That's, yeah, it's pretty close, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So we were talking about Italy and The Godfather, and, I happened to wake up in the middle of the night, and I saw Fox and Friends just the other day, and Dennis Prager of Prager University, who I looked him up on Wikipedia, and he's an Orthodox Jew from Brooklyn and went to yeshiva school, but he does have a wide following on YouTube with Prager University and so on, and I'm not disparaging that, but somebody asked him about President Trump's executive order, which nearly, at least implies that Jewish people and on college campuses, if you're against the BDS movement, the boycott, diversify, and you leave Israeli business interests,
Divest. Yeah.
divest. That that you are anti-Semitic, because if you're against Zionism, you are anti-Semitic, which is not a very extreme position to take. But then he started talking about the Jewish right to self-determination, and then he said it's just like Italy. He says, don't the Italians have a right to their own country?
What would Corleone have to say about that?
But, it immediately brought to mind to me, remember a few years ago when the Pastafarians were a big thing? The flying spaghetti monster that they said was God, and that they demanded to be recognized as a church. Was
that real? Or
yeah, that was a few years ago. It was in the news. They went to court a couple of times to try and be recognized as a real church. They said their God was the flying spaghetti monster, and they called themselves the Pastafarians.
Yeah.
But I was thinking, what if the Pastafarians said that their holy book said that they came from Italy, of course, the home of pasta, and that the evil risotto people were exterminating them. So they asked England for permission to take over Italy, and England gave them that permission to take over Italy, and America backed them up too. And so they went in and kicked out all the Italians and killed them and took their land and created the Pastafarian paradise in Italy. That's exactly what Zionism really is, and that's what blew my mind about that statement. I mean, this is a very, very intelligent man. He has YouTubes talking about conservatism all over the place, and yet he can say that the takeover of the Palestine people based on their holy book. When Palestine is 4,000 years old, and the most that the Jewish people have been dominant in there is about less than 500 years, and yet it's their right to take over the land because it's their holy book. And and to compare that to Italy, it was just amazing to me. But that's the way they are.
The most corrupt and most powerful organized crime family is probably not who you think, is it, Bob?
You know what? Let me try to rope this all together, along with my book.
Makes a great.
Godfather 2, the
Go ahead.
movie.
Yeah.
There's a character, Hyman Roth, who's basically Meyer Lansky.
Right.
Okay. Interesting. I mentioned before the break Whitney Webb's piece on Mint Press News. It's actually 4 pieces.
Right.
And she ties a lot of Jeffrey Epstein going all the way back to Meyer Lansky, to organized crime, their influence on the political system, and the way they set up basically blackmail houses, which is what Jeffrey Epstein was running.
Right. That's exactly what it was.
Get tapes on people and incriminating
I gotcha.
criminal activities and blackmail. Okay, back when The Godfather came out, you didn't talk about organized crime. This was groundbreaking. And in Godfather 2, there's a scene where this Hyman Roth character is shot at the airport in something that looks almost exactly like Oswald being shot in the basement of the Dallas police station. And the similarity was intentional. But this was a time when the revelations about Kennedy and the mob were coming out, but it was still kind of a taboo subject, especially in the mainstream press. Everybody knew that the mafia had a lot of political influence,
including the assassination of Kennedy.
Absolutely, there's all sorts of indications that the mafia was involved with that. Whether we ever know the complete and full truth on the Kennedy assassination, we obviously know that the Warren Commission report was a whitewash.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're at that stage now with Israel and Trump and the Jewish lobby and their influence in Washington. Everybody knows it's there, but like organized crime 4 or 5 decades ago, you still can't really talk about it. It's still not in the mainstream. They're still too powerful. They can still stifle dissent. They can still use American foreign policy for their own ends. And so it's similar. And that particular thing, just like the Kennedy assassination, we may not know the full truth on all of that. But there was a lot of documentation about the ties between Israeli intelligence and U.S. intelligence, people like Epstein, Robert Maxwell, in those Whitney Webb articles. I can't recommend them highly enough.
The Bramfman family of Canada, a very prominent Jewish family that was both in the government and in organized crime, and they're the ones that gave Al Capone his liquor license. Got him his liquor license. Technically, he was supposed to only be importing medicinal alcohol during Prohibition.
You mean it wasn't medicinal alcohol?
Yeah, no, it wasn't.
Boy,
that's why he had to keep 2 sets of books. That's how they got him on income tax, because he had a government license to import medicinal alcohol, but he was, of course, importing, speakeasy booze, and so he kept 2 sets of books, and that's how they got him on income tax. So, but the Hyman Roth
in the book, by the way, you bring up Al Capone. It's kind of interesting, but the book sets up a confrontation between Vito Corleone, the Godfather, and Al Capone, and really denigrates Capone as a publicity-seeking fool who got what was coming to him, and contrasts that with the Godfather's very understated style of business, never make a threat unless you have to or whatnot. And Capone sends a couple of killers to New York to take out one of the Corleone family members, and the Godfather has an interesting way of dealing with those two.
But the Hyman Roth scene, when Michael Corleone goes down to Cuba to invest in the Cuban casinos that Roth runs, and during the after the negotiations, Roth says, "Are you in or not?" And Michael says he's in, and Hyman Roth says, Hyman Roth always makes money for his friends. And whenever I see that, I can't help but think of Representative Omar, when she came out and said, "It's all about the Benjamins, baby."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And that's the money power. That's the money power that they've wielded down through the centuries. And it always stands in their stead. Yeah.
There's a great quote from Hyman Roth in that series of scenes down in Cuba where he says, "We finally have what we've always wanted, real partnership with a government," referring to the Cuban government.
Oh, yeah.
And again, the identity of interest between organized crime and the government.
Yeah. What is the businessman's deadliest sin?
Pride. Ego.
Mm-hmm.
I touched on it earlier, but it has to be fought at every turn when you're it. And I repeat a phrase several times in the book. Your worst trades follow your best trades, and I illustrated actually where I made a gal in my business and I had what's called a joint account on a big block of bonds that we sold at a nice profit, and not 2 hours later I got a call from the sales.
I think I know who
salesman.
that woman is. Yeah, don't I know her?
Yeah. Well, she was over at Merrill Lynch. You may or may not. Very good trader. But I got a call from one of our salesmen peddling some bonds that seemed abnormally cheap because they were guaranteed by an insurance company called Executive Life. I bought the bonds thinking, oh boy, I'm going to make another big score. Executive Life went into conservatorship in California. I lost a fairly appreciable chunk of money as the bonds went way down in value from where I bought them, and it took us years to get the situations straightened out. But I'm not sure I would have made that trade if I hadn't made the earlier trade where we made a lot of money. And I'm telling myself what a great trader I am, and what a great job I'm.
Well, they're not going to all go your way.
No.
But I've just seen it over and over in business, and some people.
10 seconds. 10 seconds.
I think ego's the most powerful drug in the world.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you need high-quality estate planning and family law services? I'm Reno attorney Todd Torvinen. I practice in the areas of estate planning, probate, family law, and divorce taxes.
This is Oliver X. Join me and the superstar Janez Carter weekday mornings from 8 to 9 on the Reno Todd Tonight Show on America Matters Media.
Are you shy and don't want to talk on the air? Text us your questions or comments to 775-237-2266. Now, back to the show.
Hello, welcome back to Talking Truth to Power. This is your host, Brendan Trainor, our co-host, the venerable Leland Faegre, and we have special guest Robert Gore.
The venerable Robert Gore.
Yes. And the author of Everything I Know About Business I Learned from the Godfather, which is now available on Amazon. And also on his website, straightlinelogic.com. Is that right, Albert? Robert?
That's correct.
Okay. All right, so where would we want to go in this section? You mentioned something about the last chapter in your book.
Well, I've had people say, gee, how can you lift business lessons from a bunch of criminals?
Huh.
Fair question, and the ultimate answer lies in the book, but it does follow an art. And I do lift lessons from criminals about things that I think Don Vito and Don Michael Corleone, lessons that can be imparted from the way they did business or whatnot. And I think they're valuable lessons. But then the art goes the other direction and says, but if you're going to devote your life to criminal enterprise, the people who succeed in those kind of enterprises, the ultimate success always comes to the person most willing to wield violence. Okay, and that, that gets you back to government, the ultimate wielder of violence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The other thing it does on a personal, individual level is it destroys your soul. If you remember the last scene of Godfather Part 2, Michael is sitting out on a bench in Lake Tahoe forest, and you can almost see, just in the cold stare and the cold eyes and everything, this is a man who has lost his soul. He has everything. This beautiful compound in Lake Tahoe. He owns hotels.
I've been by that compound.
Yeah, it's a beautiful place, I'm sure, spread out and so on and so forth.
He had everything.
He owns hotels. He's head of the most powerful criminal family in America. He has everything, and as I say in the book, he's really got nothing. He's given. He sold his soul for what he has, and I extend that and say, we're coming up on a choice in this country. Things will fall apart. And you're going to have to decide if you're going to be on the side of what I call the peasant avantes, which in Italian means the big shots, the important people, the powers that be, or whether you're going to be on the other side of that and whether you're going to fight them. Mm-hmm. And I say to not make a choice is to make a choice.
Yeah, just by default. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
These people have ruined the country, and we're about to pay the consequences, and choices are going to have to be made. And that's how I close the book, essentially.
Mm-hmm. And it's timely because that's what we're watching on the floor of the United States Congress today. It's effectively the formality of the kind of end of the game that you describe in your book.
Yeah, and we were talking earlier, Leland, and you said, they're desperate. They are desperate. Trump, for all his pluses and minuses, has exposed exactly what we have running this country, the people we have running this country. I mean, maybe not into the weeds and all the details, but we have a pretty good idea that this country is being run by people who don't have our best interests at heart. And we're seeing this with this impeachment charade.
We do that here on Talking Truth to Power every week. And as I see this thing play out, I mean, we have a single, as you mentioned, a single choice, and it will take time. And this is what draining the swamp looks like. It's not going to be, a neat little episode of human history that we're experiencing.
No, it'll be long and drawn out. I think it's kind of if you know what the graph of an exponential function looks like, it builds up for a long, long time, like compound interest. And then all of a sudden there's an inflection point and it shoots straight up. I think the inflection point, and I believe I say this in the book, the inflection point is going to be when the financial system starts collapsing in on itself, as it did back in 2008, 2009.
Yeah, what I call the color depression, because the first one was a black and white depression. There was no color images at the time. Where do you think interest rates are going here? Particularly the long end.
I think the interest rates probably bottomed in, I think it was either July or June of midsummer 2016. I think that the progression is going to be what I just talked about, kind of an exponential curve. I think they're going to slowly rise. We're seeing a lot of panic, ructions, whatever you want to call it, in the repo market.
The repo market is. What do you think is going on in the repo market? Is it just a lack of liquidity because of the accelerated dynamic of growth in the economy? Is it as simple as that?
No, I think it's. I think there's some sub rosa explanation. I have read very technical explanations about banks and what they're doing with their balance sheet and regulatory type stuff. I think it's a sign of real stress in the fixed income markets. And I believe the fact that they have to inject $500 billion over the next 3 or 4 weeks tells you that there's some sort of stress that has to be addressed. I think it's a panic move. I think it could well be precursor to some sort of financial freefall.
And don't you? What I find particularly interesting is there's very little exposure, media exposure of this. It's really a subset, isn't it? It's pushed way back.
Media exposure would be like yelling fire in a crowded movie house, or yelling bank run in front of a bank. I think that's part of it. I think. I do 90% of my reading in the alternative media. I'm not surprised the mainstream's not covering this. Nobody really wants to talk about it, but just the fact that it's happening is a hugely significant story. It's being covered very well in the alternative media. Some of the best explanations I've seen, and they have been different explanations, but at least plausible, have come off the Zero Hedge website. I put some of those stories up on my website. But, yeah, nobody's talking about it, and I think the reason nobody's talking about it is because the downside looms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
it looks very, very interesting to me. That's what I'm.
It's kind of like I don't know if you remember the last financial crisis, but I think it was in early 2007. Two Bear Stearns mortgage-backed hedge funds went under. That was the canary in the coal mine.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a feeling that this one, the repo crisis, is going to be the canary in this coal mine.
Mm-hmm.
It may take a while to play out. You may see the stock market go a little higher. Back in 2007, it went up after the Bear Stearns fiasco. That went up for 3 or 4 months afterwards.
Yep.
But, something is definitely not right.
Yeah, I left the securities industry just at that time. That was when I decided that the regulatory trends did not look good. And you were not too far behind me, were you? It seems like it was just.
I left in 2012, and one of the things, speaking of regulatory trends and organized crime, right after you left and right after the financial crisis, we both worked for this little firm down in Los Angeles. And the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, decided that our little firm posed a dire threat to the financial system. Now, our little firm's, yearly cash flow wouldn't equal what goes through Goldman Sachs, say, in an hour. But we had SEC regulators crawling all over the place. I had set up and I talk about this some in the book, I had set up a proprietary trading desk to make a lot of, big short type negative bets on the financial system or whatnot. We had to explain, even though we'd made a lot of money on these things, we had to explain them and explain them and explain them.
Yeah, that's where
meetings with our management and everything. So, and I think it was all just the bigger firms saw the financial crisis as a way to eliminate or consolidate the competition, and that's exactly what happened.
They considered you a threat, and they didn't like that. That's the monopoly mindset of the Rothschilds, who said, "Permit me to issue and control the money of a nation, and I care not who makes its laws." That's the mindset of.
Yeah, I was reading George Washington's farewell address, and one thing struck me. He says, "The rule of conduct for us in regards to foreign nations is extending our commercial relations, but to have with them as little political connection as possible." And, our commercial relations are just totally politically connected nowadays. Everything is this international body, that international body, the central banks, the sanctions that we were imposing on everybody, they're all rebelling against it. So there's going to be a day of reckoning. That sure.
Globalism is we're experiencing today.
Yes, exactly.
On the floor of the House of Representatives.
Yes.
That's what this is all about. They can't let
go.
They cannot let this go.
Yep.
We've got about 30 seconds, Bob. What about your new technology venture?
I'm involved with a company that's commercializing the technology of a genius, an 86-year-old former Princeton professor.
So someone other than yourself?
I'm no genius. This guy's a real genius.
We'll have you back to discuss this and plenty more. Happy Christmas, everyone, and we'll see you.
You can't say that
next year.